So, one of the things that I do for helping change behavior is trying to make it harder for them to find the information simply by asking someone. So, for example, if you had team members coming to you and they were saying, "Hey, how do I solve this problem?" Or, "Hey, where do I find this information?" Instead of giving them the answer, you say, "Have you checked here first?" I can dive really deep on these other pillars. And these other ones, in most cases, I'm going to refer to someone like you guys, for example, because that's your specialty. But I still want to call it out when I do these audits because I will see it and they need to know that this is something that they need to address.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the How to Scale a Business podcast. My name is Hector Esteban, and I am your host for today. Our special guest is Miss Madi Waggoner, and she is someone who helps remote startups scale by fixing gaps in systems, team, and operations. And so what I love about what we're going to talk about today is it's like the things that you do, like it's like the keystone sort of habits, if you will. Impacting one thing is going to impact everything in your business. So Madi, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Hector. I am so glad to be here. Can't wait to dive in.
I do think it probably, sometimes the context and the story isn't warranted, but for someone who's always in your sort of roles, I'm always curious how someone ends up, in a position, in a role like you, because I think it's so needed today, especially for a lot of the entrepreneurs who are very visionary and they're very, idea oriented. And then they start a business and realize that it's more than just ideas, or it's more than just, there's so much more to it. And it really takes someone like you to come along and help us get all the things dialed in. So I'd love to hear a little, what the key points along your journey were, and then we can sort of talk about, some of the specifics and how you help businesses.
Yeah, for sure. So I started out just working with tech startups. I actually took one of my earliest jobs. I took a design course from this design education company. They had courses and boot camps, and I just loved their experience. So I reached out to them and asked them, "How can I support you?" And that started this journey of I was with them for 3 years, and we built, I was like employee number 3, and we grew up to 23, 24 by the time I left. And that was one of the first points, because I got not only the opportunity to work directly with founders and help them scale their vision, but also work directly with our customers. And in that particular business, we also worked with mentors. We had design students and we also had mentors. So there were a lot of different people involved in this. And I took a lot of things that I learned there around, like, how do you look at customer retention, for example? We had this one problem with our boot camp where our students, we gave them this 2-week grace period to withdraw if they felt like it wasn't a fit after getting their feet wet with it. And we really didn't have the best retention rates within that 2-week period. So I dove into it. I did interviews. I looked at the data. And what I found is that we weren't actually matching students and mentors in the best way. So I restructured our entire application process for both our students and our mentors. And what that whole result was that we matched them based on their learning and mentorship styles. And our retention for our students went up by 50%. And there are different things like that a lot of people don't understand, that operationally you can have direct revenue impacts on.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I heard in there that I'd love to talk about. And one of them is this idea of KPIs. Whenever I talk to someone who has no one has your genius, but individuals who are, of the operations sort of space, or I know fractional CEOs are becoming more and more prevalent, or it's just becoming more of a thing in the space, is that KPIs undoubtedly comes up. And it's like, what are you tracking? What are your numbers? And me being like the visionary creative, I'm like, how cool is it? How shiny of an object is it? How much energy is sort of, am I feeling about the particular, project or idea? And so I would just love to hear your perspective on KPIs and numbers, and if it's a blind spot that is like, do you think is it just me, or are there other businesses that are sort of suffering from that same sort of, riding and driving blind sort of syndrome?
It's definitely not just you. It's very common across the different businesses I work with, because I've seen this, that when anyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their tendencies, when they step into this CEO founder position, they become the visionary. They have so many ideas where they could take the business. They have so many options. I like to say that when you're a business owner, you have so many opportunities and ways that you can go, but also you have so many opportunities and ways that you could go. and it becomes very overwhelming. So trying to determine what numbers should you be focusing on can be very challenging. So when I work with founders, what I help them focus on is, what are the most important things to you? What are the most important things in the business? Okay, can we get some clear numbers and things that we want to focus on to help make sure that we're moving in the right direction? And that can, in some cases, that's like a percentage increase or a dollar figure, or in some cases, it's a yes, no. I once worked with a client where they'd been trying to launch a course for 2 years, and they knew that their audience wanted it. They wanted it out, but they just couldn't get it done. And they were planning to sell it for 5K a seat. So it was a good revenue generator as well. And for them, what they needed is they needed someone to come alongside them and essentially create an outline from what they wanted to cover and then put that into a system so that they could actually get it done. And that's what I did for them. So they went from 2 years, this being kind of on the back burner, trying to get it moving, to us launching it 3 months after I started working with them. And for them, it was kind of more of a yes, no of like, let's just get this thing done so it's off of our minds and we have it out there. And then at that point, they were able to take what we did with that particular course and have more specific revenue goals off of that. How do we optimize it? How do we ensure that our students are getting good results? So when you're thinking about what numbers are important, I always recommend that you have someone with you who has kind of more of an objective perspective on it, versus your ideas can go all over the place, and you need to have someone who can say, yes, I love this idea. Let's talk about this for a few minutes. I'll take some notes, but then I'm going to put it in our little file over here because it's going to distract us from something else. So you need someone to help you focus on the right KPIs, the right numbers, the right focuses. And it can be really hard to do that when you're in this place of being a visionary, but we also need the visionary role as well. So it's more about just having the right people in those seats, even if they're part-time or a consultant. It helps so much when you're in this role as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think it's probably, well, I know I did it. Like a solopreneur, a freelancer, sort of an early stage, business leader can kind of get by early on without really knowing a whole lot of numbers. Maybe the business isn't as complex or they're in everything. But I think that what it seems to do as you grow is it just gives you insight into things. It just gives you insight into the health of your business and the way that you might. Recently I've been monitoring my steps and I've been trying to hit that certain KPI there, and I've bought a food scale and I'm, measuring my calories. And I think one of the interesting things in that regard is sometimes you're surprised and you're surprised by how much calories are in a certain thing or when it comes to our business and we've started tracking things, I'm sometimes surprised by either how good or bad, a number is when it may seem or may feel fine, but then when you actually get some data on it, you're able to bring, like you said, that objective perspective, which I think is so critical when someone's running a business.
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many times where I've come into businesses, I say, well, what are your numbers here? Or what are your expenses? And they can't tell me, or I have to go and figure this out. And I've worked with some clients where our first goal is just to get insight on those numbers of how many sales are you actually making? And then what's your total revenue? What are your revenue sources, especially if they have multiple revenue sources? And then what are your expenses? Because oftentimes they just start hiring because they feel overwhelmed, because hiring can be a big line item in your budget. And in some cases, they don't actually need those roles, or in some cases, they hired the wrong people. And if you don't start measuring these things, you can't get an objective perspective on, like you said, the health of your business. So there's definitely some things that are like softer ratings that maybe aren't hard numbers. Like I like to tell founders, just start writing a list of things that are driving you insane and get those things down and see, because if you can see it on paper, that can help. And that's just even one step further of like getting clear on what has been ambiguous, because if you leave it all up in your head, it just kind of stays there and you can't be objective. You can't make clear decisions. So whatever it is that feels ambiguous, I would say start looking at the numbers, get it down on paper, whatever that looks like, just start moving in that direction.
Are there any other blind spots that you find businesses like either reveal themselves through this sort of data collection and sort of this, fact finding or, getting these insights? Is there anything that emerges more often than not after you go in and start to look at some of these numbers?
Yeah. So with every client that I work with, I basically do an audit on their business. And I call this the 7-day scale plan. And the whole point of it is to identify these hidden things that they likely aren't seeing. A really big one is how they communicate with their team members, whether they're contractors, contractors, whether they're full-time, whatever it is, because most of the time I hear that people are texting or emailing and using those kinds of tools in order to stay on top of business communication. But what needs to happen is it needs to be like, if this is a real business, if this is a legitimate business, we have to be intentional with our communication, not only in the tools we use. Like I recommend using a project management tool and a tool like Slack for your two main communication pieces, but also in how we use them. We have to keep communication on particular tasks or projects in the project management tool, because then the information is available to everyone there. Everyone can trust that the information is there. Even in how we organize information, if, say, someone on your team were to send you a message, if they use the same general template and they bold the thing that's most important to you, and then they bold and underline the thing that they need from you, you know exactly what they need. You know exactly when they need it because of how intentional they were in their communication. And very, very few businesses are aware of that. And they don't have any idea how much that can impact their ability to scale.
Yeah, especially in 2025, when I think about, my business, which is perhaps on one end of the spectrum, but our team is so distributed across the planet that like you could spin a globe and like stop it, and you might, like equally, we're all so spread out. And in an office, or like, if this business were even 20 years ago, we would be forced to have to interact, or we would, look up and peek over someone's cubicle, or, walk into someone's office and have those conversations. And now those are, like you said, being done in email threads, or they're being done in sort of these ad hoc places that, I in my mind, can't help but lead to a lack of productivity or effectiveness unless you're sort of intentional, like you're saying.
Exactly. And I've worked with teams, and that design company I was talking about, we had students and mentors all over the globe. Our team was all over the globe. And so in order to be as effective as possible and move as quickly and scale the way we did, we increased our revenue 6 times over 8 quarters. And I essentially had a new job every quarter. I was working there full time. And we had to be so intentional, because say I do some work and then I leave it, I'm done for the day, and someone who's in the next time zone comes in, is like, oh no, I need these things in order to complete this work that has to be done today. And I wasn't intentional with my communication around what was done, where I put information, where the links are, et cetera, then either they're going to be having to ping me and interrupt time with my family, or maybe they can't reach me and then the work gets delayed, or they're just confused, or I send them in the wrong direction because I wasn't clear. And then they do the work and we have to redo it because it was done incorrectly. Like, so many people don't consider how intentional you have to be for the person who is receiving the information. And this is one of the core things I do when I work with teams, where not only do I work with the founder, but I work with their team as well to help improve their communication all around, because it's this whole feedback loop around how exactly do we share communication? How is it received? And then what can we do better next time?
Yeah, it seems like you must have been like watching our operations over the last 2 weeks, and must have been studying and prepping for this interview. I see what's going on here.
Yes, I'm a spy. I've been watching.
Yeah, you have been. You've been tapped into our Notion and our Slack channel and seeing all the things that are going on. Because we're going through it, and especially as you scale and as the team gets bigger and larger, I've realized that as the founder, not that I have less. I guess I do have less power, right? Less control. I can't do everything. I can't effect everything. And so at least for me, my brain goes into creating systems and culture and trying to find the people that can put those in place. But in your mind, for the founder to be able to, knowing that they can't do everything, what needs to be in place for them to scale the business in a way that, doesn't drain their soul and take decades off of their life?
Yeah. So I cover this by looking at my L.I.F.T framework, and it covers 4 main areas: leader, infrastructure, fuel, which is more like marketing, sales related, and delivery for whatever your product is, and then team. So across all of those different areas, you have to address all of them. Otherwise, the entire business will have more friction. So for the leader, for example, leaders have to have good leadership skills. They have to know how to delegate well. They have to know how to give their team autonomy. And part of that is only possible because if they don't trust their team, they're not going to give them autonomy. So if you don't have the right team members in place, then we have to evaluate, okay, what is the issue there? Are they not a right fit for the role, which is oftentimes the case. So how do we bring in these A players so that the founder can then trust those people? And then once we have good people in place, how do we help train the founder so that they learn how to trust these new people? And so then we go into infrastructure of what are the systems in place to create the trust between the two of them. There's one tool I really like to recommend that I would highly suggest anyone listening uses called weekly reporting. Essentially, all it needs to be is a form that asks four to five main questions. What were your wins for this week? And this is something your team fills out every week. What were your wins? What were your challenges or blockers? What are decisions that were made? What are some things that are coming up on your roadmap in the next few weeks? And then what are some things that you're seeing that maybe I should be aware of? What that does when your team proactively shares that information is it helps give them ownership of their communication. So I mentioned some communication issues earlier. This helps alleviate a lot of that because it keeps the founder in the loop and helps the team understand that they have to be proactive in covering all of these areas. Also, it's a benefit for the team members because if they want to be promoted or put on new projects or make more money or get more hours, whatever it is, that helps show the founder that they are doing all the things that they should be doing, and in some cases more than they expected. And then the founder, because they get in this cadence, they start to trust what this person is doing because they're seeing it all of the time. And this is in addition to communication, like in project management tools. And so that helps to create that trust so that the founder then can continue to back up and to trust the team and to delegate better. And that's the type of thing that we need to do in order to make sure that the founder doesn't get overly stressed. And if we don't do those things, you're just going to stay in the middle of everything and be unable to disconnect, unable to take time off. If you have kids or you're expecting kids, you're going to be unable to take time off there. And that's going to add more friction to you as a person, your personal life, and the business overall.
When we get back from break, Maddie, I want to get more into this framework because I love frameworks. And I think that you've been, working on and developing it. And I think it's so important for business owners. And so we're going to get more into that 4-part framework. Hey, y'all, today's episode is brought to you by Amplify Media. And we are a podcast and content production company. Well, we like to think of ourselves as like the media arm for your company, because chances are, if you're listening to this, you probably have a product, a passion, a mission, some sort of message that you're trying to get out to the world, but you might not have the time, the team, or the tech skills to be able to do it. Well, if that's the case, we can help. Go to amplifymedia.com. That's AMPLAFY media.com. You can also check the show notes for the link. And with that, let's get back to Maddie. So Maddie, I love frameworks because I think it sort of simplifies things in a way that people can sort of remember and take with them and just really implement and integrate in a much quicker way. So remind us of the 4 parts of the framework, and then let's, if it's okay, kind of go through each one of them.
Yeah. So it's called the L.I.F.T framework. And one way to remember it is a rising tide lifts all boats. Similarly, that if you have 4 legs of a table, if you have one of them that's not working, it's wonky, or it's completely missing, your table is going to fall over. So it's leader, infrastructure, fuel, which is like sales, marketing, those kinds of things around customer delivery as well, and then team. And fuel, the reason why those are grouped together is because they're all related. And if you don't have certain things in place, like a marketing engine, which I know you guys are very familiar with since that's part of what you do, then it's going to impact the rest of the business. You don't need to hire a team if you don't have all of the strong leads coming in, if you don't have a strong sales process of how you're going to handle those leads, if you don't have strong client delivery. And all of these pieces really feed into one another. And that's one of the ways that I focus on it, because in operations, it can feel very broad to people, but these pieces are all connected, but we then also have to address them individually.
So leadership, and do you think of them, like an order of operations, like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally? And you said it's like a table, but is there a first place to look, or, if someone's going, well, is leadership always the first place to start, or might we start at another one, at the fuel part, if that makes more sense?
It depends on what's going on with the business, which is why I do an audit every time I work with someone, because I need to understand. I will run them through all of my different frameworks in order to get them the right results, but we have to address them in a certain way. So if I'm working with a founder where it's their mentality that is creating a lot of other issues, if they are completely unable to trust their team, I have to understand, is that an issue on the founder side, or is that a team issue? And there have definitely been founders I've worked with where we have to understand what is it mentally that's going on there? And I dive into a little bit of that, but I also have people I can recommend if it needs to go deeper. I have had clients tell me before that sessions with me are kind of like therapy, which I always tell them I'm not a therapist, but I do ask really in-depth questions. So in some cases, it does start with the founder and it's around the mentality. But oftentimes when they're coming to me, it's like my team is not doing the things that I want as quickly as possible, or they're making too many mistakes, or we're just not able to move as quickly as possible. So we have to look at the team. And then with infrastructure, if they don't have, if I'm doing their audit and I say, okay, so what do you use to keep track of tasks and projects? And they say, oh, we just use email. That is absolutely going to be an infrastructure first solve, because we have to get project management tools in place, and I have to get the entire team on board to adjust to that new way of operating, new way of communicating. And part of that also means that I have to develop relationships with the team. So this is why they kind of all go together, and why I have to be very aware of how the business currently runs. Because if I can't get people on board, team members in particular, then things are not going to move as quickly as it could. So there's human side of this as well that I have to dive into.
Yes. When we've gone through, I don't know how many project management tools. I feel like we've done them all mostly. At least, we did Trello, we've done Asana, we've done Airtable, now we're in Notion. We've had to hop into ClickUp, we've had to hop into, and are you of the mind that there is a best one? Or do you have a favorite and kind of it's treat it like a Pepsi Coke sort of thing? Like, where do you come down on the tools that someone should be using?
Yeah. So I used to say that I'm tools agnostic, but now I am very clearly pro certain tools, and others just work better for other people. So my favorite project management tool is Asana. I've used it for years in all the tech startups I've worked in. But I also use Notion more specifically because it's more of a documentation and writing tool. Asana is not built for that. And a lot of these tools, like I know Notion has a task manager, but one of the challenges I had with them is that when you tried to create templates, the information within the template, if you had another file within it, wouldn't get duplicated. It was always the original. And I actually reached out to a friend of mine who's on their engineering team and said, yeah, we can't fix this because of how it was built, apparently. So I use certain tools for the purpose that they were originally built for. Because when these tools start getting larger and larger, the companies do, they start adding features. They want to be all things to all people. And I don't think that actually works very well. And maybe there's some other tools out there that work better, and I'm just not familiar with them. But I use Asana for project management, Notion for writing content, for documentation on how we do things. And then I mentioned earlier, we use Slack, and that's more for culture building and quick communication. But if we are having discussions in Slack, we want to make sure that if it needs to be saved, whatever decision or however we're doing the process, whatever we've decided on, that needs to go into Asana related to that task or into Notion to capture it as documentation.
Yeah. You mentioned there's the tool, which I think is its own sort of challenge. And I'm a tool nerd. So I have to with my operations guy, I had to delay our transition for almost 6 months because we had just switched to another one. And then I was like, I found Notion. We're going to switch to another one. And so, like you said, there's this human part of it, right? Of actually, okay, there's the task and then there's knowing how the task, but then they're actually getting the people to use the tools. And for me, I've found that that's been a challenge for us, perhaps because I'm such an early adopter that I'm so willing to try and do new things. But are there things that you have found that have helped? I would imagine even particularly older generations use things like Slack and Notion and Asana?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do for helping change behavior is trying to make it harder for them to find the information simply by asking someone. So for example, if you had team members coming to you and they were saying, hey, how do I solve this problem? Or, hey, where do I find this information? You say, instead of giving them the answer, you say, have you checked here first? And then they go and you kind of force them to go and look. And if they come back and they're like, I still couldn't find it, could you help me out? Then it's you might take a minute to show them in Loom or something, or you get on a call with them, again, depending on your time availability, someone else on the team could potentially do this, have them pull up the tool and have them walk through it, because we have to get them used to looking in these places and used to using the tools. So that's one way when questions or problems come up, I would walk them through. It takes a little more time, but if you want to have people adopt, you have to get them used to using it. And one big thing I always tell founders too is that you do not have to be the one teaching everyone how to do this. You can utilize other team members. And there's actually a graphic that I have that I could share with you. We could put in the show notes that is called the founder dot diagram, is what I call it. So essentially, imagine a founder is a central dot. And when you're starting out as a solopreneur, it's just you. Then when you add someone else, there's another dot off to the side, and there's a line between the two. And then that works okay because you're just communicating. But the more dots you add on the outside, if you just have lines going straight into the founder, you're going to get overwhelmed. And I see this happen all the time. What we have to do actually when we bring on new team members is create connections between the dots on the outside, all of the different people. Because when we do that, the founder is not the bottleneck. The founder is not the one who's fielding all these questions. And especially in a remote environment, no one can see that. If you were in an office, you could see if a bunch of people were going by the founder's office every 2 minutes to ask questions. Can't see that in a remote environment. So if we create relationships between other team members, we use them as onboarding buddies, we use them as training buddies, whatever it is, that will also free up the founder. And that will make it easier for these people to adopt to these new tools too.
I'm sad that we only have a few more minutes left, but one of the things that we haven't touched on as much is the fuel part of it. And I think that perhaps it's kind of interesting that, at least in my head, operations and marketing sort of occupy different pillars, or they are, at least apparently in my head, distinct or different. You've grouped them together. How do you see those two working together, or in which ways do you think that the operations really, or the operations can drive the marketing and sales side of it?
Well, for one example, when I was working at another company, I helped with the customer support side of the business and customer success. And so I was inside a lot of the communication with existing customers. And if we can take that information and share it back to our marketing team or to our sales team based on if our customers are really delighted with what we're delivering to them, that's something that we should share to marketing and sales. And the internal team who's dealing with everything after a sale is made needs to be partnering with those other departments, those other team members, because we all have different insights. If marketing and sales can also communicate what they're seeing, whether it's data or in conversations, back to other people who are helping to deliver the service, that can create a more cohesive experience for our customers, for our clients. But we have to treat each other like we're all pieces of the same team, and we have different strengths and we have different perspectives. There's that idea of, if you're looking at an elephant, one person sees the trunk, one person sees the leg. We have to give ourselves the opportunity to communicate and create this whole picture together, because that's how we deliver fantastic experiences. And as far as your question around the fuel overall, part of the reason it's together is because I can dive really deep on these other pillars, and these other ones, in most cases, I'm going to refer to someone like you guys, for example, because that's your specialty. But I still want to call it out when I do these audits, because I will see it and they need to know that this is something that they need to address.
Yeah, I think operationalizing that side of it is so important, just because whether businesses are, they run on word of mouth or referrals, or I know there's been times in the business where I'm like, business just happens. And I'm like, it's sort of like magic marketing. And I don't really know what's happening. Things, I'm doing stuff, but nothing's being tracked, and nothing is sort of, there's less of a system behind it that can be replicatable, or that eventually the founder can be removed from, which I think is ultimately the goal for most.
Exactly. Yeah. And you need someone who can create those systems for you and continue to make them better and iterate on them so that you can be less and less involved.
Right. Because I think so many founders, and I'm myself included, put myself in that bucket, was like, we're the rainmakers. And so we go out there and close deals and get clients and whatever. And that's cool. And it makes us feel good and, gives us, it boosts our ego, but it also leads to burnout. And we just can't be, or we can, I'm sure. But I think most people want to eventually remove themselves from that role at some point. So
exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything, I have one more question, well, I guess two more questions for you, but is there anything else that we missed today that you wanted to make sure that we touched on or that you think is relevant to today's conversation?
I would say that if you are trying to grow your business and things feel very chaotic, you need to bring some type of operations person in. I'd be happy to work with anyone who has that challenge, but don't try and do it on your own, because if you try and just white knuckle it through, you're going to have more friction, more burnout, and more frustration.
For sure. And if people wanted to find out more about you or go deeper in your world, I think you have, what's the best place for people to go?
Yeah. So my website is buildingremote.co, no M at the end. So buildingremote.co. And then I also have an assessment called the Founders Focus Assessment that we can link in the show notes if that's cool, for listeners to go through. And essentially what it does is it helps to create clarity on what you're spending your time on and what you should be spending your time on. Part of this process helps to pull out what are the things that I either procrastinate on or really avoid or am not good at. And it helps to bring some clarity to, should I be doing this work? Should I hire this out? Or is there a smarter way to do this? And most of the time, founders don't take that time to do it. So it's one of the very first activities I encourage when I start talking with someone.
Cool. And we'll definitely link that up in the show notes as well. My last question for you, Madi, is, in your opinion, what is the secret to scaling a business?
A growth mindset. Because not only do you have to have a growth mindset if you want to, try different things on the marketing side, but you have to have a growth mindset in order to improve who you are as a leader, how to grow your team and bring on people who may even be smarter than you in certain areas. Because when you're able to do that, you can bring on these rock stars, which will help to elevate your business and be able to scale faster.